All right, when we talk about the gesture, we're talking about a little bit more than just the line of action. The line of action defines the spine, and it kind of goes from the tip of the head through the bottom of the pelvis. Now, when we talk about gesture, we're really going to flesh that out. And you'll hear a lot of people say when you talk about drawing that they can't draw anything but a stick figure, right? Well, I know that that may seem self-deprecating and kind of fun and stuff like that, but it's not actually that far off. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to make a really complex stick figure that's a little bit more useful to us as artists. And the gesture is really going to consist of the same types of attributes and speed that you're going to get from a stick figure, except we're going to actually put the joints where they belong. Okay, and so our gesture, our stick figure, is going to be a little bit more like this. Right? It's going to have a little bit more complexity. We're still really not that far off from what we may have started from, stick figure. Okay, but this little guy here, if you were doing a sculpture, he would be the armature. Okay, he would be the flexible, bendable wire that you define the form with before you start packing on clay. The only difference here between these two is that this one has better proportions, and this one over here has one shoulder joint and one hip joint. Okay, so we're just separating those things out a little bit, and we're actually not as far off as we probably thought we were in the beginning. So let's just open something new here, and I'm going to take a look at what a gesture looks like when you go all the way through. So I'm just going to talk it through. I'm going to start with a line of action, and as I'm defining the gesture, I want to keep my strokes long. Right, and I'll define the hips and the shoulders where they go. We want to have some sort of angle opposing one another. We want to have some sort of contrapposto, counter posture. Okay, and so I may define these things a little bit differently with a different kind of shorthand than others might. But it really is about capturing that attitude and that gesture right off the bat. All right, and then we straighten the head out at this point too, just to kind of cock it a little bit against the body. But when we do hips and shoulders, you'll notice that I'm kind of doing these opposing angles here, and that's just to show a sense of weight being transferred from one side of the body to the other. As you're looking at your figures and you're doing your drawings for this week, take a look at if you could pick up one of the limbs, right? If you could pick up one of the feet, which one would it be to keep the figure still planted on the ground? I mean, I could technically pick this foot up, and all the weight is still being brought down on this side here. So that'll give you a better sense of feeling the pose as well. Okay, so I'm going to toss out the arm here and bring that down to the side. Now this is a really quick gesture, and these things shouldn't take more than, when you get good at them, it shouldn't take you more than 30-45 seconds to get something like this done. And it captures the attitude. You can already see there's a little bit of attitude. That thrusting out of the hip gives the figure a little bit of attitude, and it gives it definitely. This isn't a little a timid little girl or something like that. This person has some strength, some power to her. So I'm just going to continue to define this a little bit. There we go. Okay, and so we've got a figure that's grounded, right? There's a definite sense that this figure is on the ground. There's a definite sense of weight, and we didn't stray that far away from our original. I'm going to get a little crosshair in here so we can see which direction they're looking. We didn't stray that far away from the stick figure. We just added a couple more elements of volume, and this is what's absolutely 100% needed before we get into the block construction that we talk about in the lesson about volume. Block construction basically is just saying I'm going to take my my character's arm, and I'm going to define it with an oval, or sorry, a cylinder for the bicep and a sphere for the shoulder, and you're going to start to define these more complex forms with very simple geometric shapes to help you visualize, right? And that's really typical. But what we want to do before we get there is to define the gesture on this side. What that does then is it's going to be our natural inclination. We start doing these more geometric forms to really tighten up. Okay, and it really tends to start to get stiff, especially when you start getting, defining forms with cubes and cylinders and things that are supposedly parallel to one another. And so the figure can get very, very stiff very, very quickly. What a loose gesture does is it allows us to have a building block to start from, and then when we start putting in the actual blocks, the actual block construction, it doesn't get as stiff and regimented as if we were just if we just started making a bunch of boxes and circles and spheres and things. Okay, so this will actually help us to stay a little bit looser, and that's what life drawing is all about. The human body is very, very loose and limber and flexible, and so we want that to come across in our gesture drawings before we start defining these forms. Okay, and so I may actually zoom in just a little bit here so we can kind of, I'm working on a very small tablet doing these demos for you guys, and you're working on an 18 by 24 pad, so there's going to be a little bit lost in translation, but hopefully you'll get the point on it here. What I'm going to do is I'll just fill all this in so we can kind of see the volume we're talking about. Alright, and then we'll knock this back here so we see a little depth in the chest. Okay, and again, going down to this, these aren't circles, they're spheres. They have volume to them, and that's really important. So they may look like circles, but that's just for because I'm not shading them right now. And I'm not going to go into, we could actually define the hand as a cube of some sort, and and have each individual finger coming off as a collection of cylinders, but it's not necessary at this point. I'm just keeping the gesture really loose. I just need to define the direction of the hand, so keep that in there. And everybody develops a different shorthand. I think there's a big concern for, well, I got to find my style. What's my personal style? The best illustrators I know are the most versatile ones, are the ones that don't nail themselves down to a style. They just draw well, and then that style comes out. So don't make it a huge goal at the beginning here to find a style. Just worry about being good. Just worry about depicting a form well and quickly. And so when I knock this back here, you can see the things are a little bit offset. Because that stomach area is one that's a little more flexible than the rest of the body, right? So we can kind of throw that in there, and all of a sudden we've got something where we've actually worked up to the outline a little bit more. All right, so let's get rid of that and go back to here. This is the goal for that first initial part of your assignment, is to work with this gesture here. You're going to start with a line of action. Okay. That should be part number one, and then you're throwing in the hips and the shoulders, and that should be number two. You can hit the head afterwards, kind of give it some direction, and all of a sudden you've got a character that you can start to work with. But we really don't need to go any more detail than this. We don't have to worry about muscles and contour lines and structure and all that stuff. That'll come later, right? We don't start with the superhero stuff, right? We start with what's on the inside, okay? Because if you don't get the gesture right, it won't matter where you put the muscles afterwards. You won't be able to save it. Once you get past the gesture phase, if you've missed it in the gesture phase, you're not going to make it up by adding more ripples for muscles or more rolls for fat or whatever it is. And the gesture is really just kind of an economy of line type of thing. I personally, I think that block construction is a great tool for learning volume, and there are times like with foreshortening that I'll still go back to it. But most of the time, I tend to work in this more hybrid between the two, more of like a it's like developing your own handwriting. Okay, and so the thing to keep in mind is that you want to stay loose. You want to overdraw your strokes. Try to draw long, skinny strokes rather than short, choppy strokes. to draw from that elbow like we had talked about in the previous video, and really spend your time on this gesture trying to capture attitude and emotion. And what will happen from there is you'll be able to start to see things come together, and when you need to add volume, then you go in, and like when you're on paper, you can work really, really light. Digitally, I'm just knocking it back, and then I would go in and add my volume over the top, kind of like I did with the red before, but I would be a little more careful about it. So take a look at some different references, whether you go to the mall and look at people walk around, or able to find, I think there's a lot of different references online for life drawing, for classic poses and figure drawing. And so it's best to be looking at something before you dive in with both, we jump in with both feet, I guess. Mixing my metaphors, it's horrible. But you want to make sure that you're defining the gesture, defining the attitude, defining the direction of where everything is going. This one's got a definite direction this way. You can tell by the way the eyes are going, and then everything is kind of pointing that way as well. So it's really important to stay loose, to watch your curves and your straights and make sure that they're kind of working together in a rhythmic fashion. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But start with the gesture. Start with the inside. You draw from the inside out. You start from this core and you work your way out. Don't start with an outline for these. So that's a little bit more on gesture. We'll be moving on to more volume coming up.